See a man try to embarrass his ex-wife in public and accidentally announce to the room that he has no idea who he's dealing with. Stay with me because this starts as a cheap humiliation in an airport lounge and ends with an $80 million jet, a legal shark in a tailored suit, and the kind of reversal that makes grown men forget how to breathe. Are you sure you belong here? The question sliced through the VIP lounge like a blade. Conversations thinned. A few heads turned subtle at first, then openly because everyone in that room recognized the tone, not curiosity, not concern, but dominance. Richard Thornton stood over Diana Williams with a champagne flute in his hand, like it was a trophy, wearing that polished, predatory smile she remembered from their marriage. The smile that always appeared when he felt powerful and wanted everyone else to know it. Diana, 38. Black sat in an Italian leather armchair with a simple coffee cup in her hands. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just sat there in a modest blazer department store. Nothing flashy, quietly composed like someone waiting for a meeting, not defending her existence. At Richard's side, his new wife, platinum blonde, nails perfect, phone already up, recorded everything with muffled giggles like humiliation was content and pain was entertainment. Seriously, D, Richard continued, dragging out the nickname that used to mean affection and now meant mockery. This lounge is for people of, how can I put it, a certain standing. Don't you think it would be more appropriate for you to wait out there with everyone else around them? Executives in expensive suits pretended to keep reading. Socialites with designer bags pretended to keep scrolling, but their eyes kept flicking back like they were watching live reality TV and trying not to look guilty about enjoying it. Richard loved that. He loved an audience. His new wife, Brittany, as she introduced herself to anyone who would listen, leaned in with a syrupy voice loud enough for the entire lounge. The air tightened. Diana breathed slowly, fingers tightening around the strap of her plain handbag just enough to show she felt it, but not enough to show it owned her. 5 years ago, she'd walked out of their marriage with almost nothing on paper. Richard's lawyers had done what expensive lawyers do. They'd sliced through accounts, assets, properties, investments, and left her with a reasonable settlement that felt like a padded insult. And Richard had enjoyed that too, because the goal wasn't just money. It was control. What he never understood, what men like Richard almost never understand, is that you can take someone's assets and still fail to take their leverage if you leave them with clarity, hunger, and time. Richard took her money. He did not take her mind. You've always been good at pretending you belong in places you shouldn't, he said, circling her chair like a predator, savoring the slow walk. Remember when you insisted on coming to my company dinners? Always trying to mingle with real people. Brittany laughed louder, angling her phone for the best shot. Tell them about her little make-believe company. Diana closed her eyes for a moment, not from shame, but like she was checking something off an internal list. Richard saw it and misread it as weakness, the way insecure men always do. Oh yes, the legendary Williams Consulting, he said, making air quotes. You rented some tiny office in a rundown building and acted like you were running an empire. Do you know how much she made a month? Less than I spend on wine. He was so intoxicated by his own cruelty, he didn't notice the subtle shift happening around them. The room wasn't laughing with him. It was starting to judge him. A man in a gray suit lowered his newspaper, expression tightening into quiet disgust. An elegant older woman shook her head, embarrassed on his behalf. Richard kept going anyway, because people like him don't stop when the room turns. They stop only when consequences arrive. Cried in court, he said, voice thick with satisfaction, begging to keep half the house. Half. Like she contributed anything besides taking up space. Diana remembered that courtroom too. Cold wood benches, the sterile rhythm of legal language. Richard's 3 lawyers painting her as an opportunist with no education, no business record, no capability. One of them had said, almost casually, that she didn't have the skills necessary to manage complex assets. Diana had left humiliated, yes, but also lit on fire. Not the loud kind of fire, the quiet kind, the kind that burns for years without going out. Richard leaned closer, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret with the whole lounge. You always thought you deserved places like this. But look at you now, alone, broke, probably in debt waiting for an economy flight to some irrelevant place. Brittany chimed in, delighted. We're going to the Bahamas on his parents' private jet. First class isn't even first class when you have your own jet. This was the moment Richard expected the payoff. Tears, pleading, a dramatic exit. Something that would feed his ego and let him walk away feeling big. Instead, Diana looked up and met his eyes with a calm that didn't match the story he was trying to force onto her. No humiliation, no fear, just serenity, the kind that comes from knowing the outcome. "I'm waiting for my flight, Richard," she said evenly. "Your flight?" Richard laughed and looked around, inviting the room to join. "Where to? Back to your tiny apartment? How many layovers you need?" Diana glanced at her watch. Simple, understated. Then she looked at him like he was something she'd already outgrown. "Are you done?" Richard's laugh faltered for the first time. "Done? Honey, I've barely started." He leaned in like poison. "Want me to tell them what you were like in bed? Or how you begged me not to leave?" That's when Diana's tone changed. Not louder, not angry, just sharper, more precise. "In 5 years, you haven't changed. You're still the same small man who needs to belittle people to feel large." Small. The word hit him harder than any insult could, because it didn't sound like a jab. It sounded like a diagnosis. Richard's voice rose. "Small? I own 3 companies. I have an 8-figure net worth. You don't even have a single digit." Diana smiled, then not defensive, not forced. A calm, genuine smile. And for the first time in that lounge, Richard felt something he wasn't familiar with when speaking to her. Uncertainty. "You're right," Diana said, standing with effortless grace and smoothing her blazer. "I don't have an 8-figure net worth." Richard visibly relaxed, ready to drink the admission like champagne. Diana met his eyes. "I have 9. The lounge went so quiet you could hear the air conditioning hum and the faint roll of suitcase wheels outside. Brittany lowered her phone for the first time, blinking like her brain couldn't render the sentence. Richard's face tightened. 9 figures? He forced a laugh that came out thin. "Diana, stop, you barely had $9 when we divorced." Diana didn't repeat herself. She didn't argue. She simply turned her gaze toward the lounge entrance as an airport employee approached with a clipboard and the anxious politeness reserved for people who cannot be kept waiting. "Ms. Williams," the employee said carefully, "I'm sorry to interrupt. Your pilot has confirmed you're ready for boarding. Mr. Morrison is on his way to escort you to the aircraft." Richard's stomach dropped. Because he knew that name. David Morrison, East Coast legal heavyweight. The kind of attorney who doesn't show up for people with department store blazers. Morrison shows up for acquisitions, crises, billion-dollar moves. Richard tried to laugh again, but the sound died in his throat. "There's a mistake," he muttered. "She can't afford Morrison." The pieces started clicking into place, but not fast enough for him to stop what was coming. It came from preparation. 3 years earlier, after the divorce, she'd been in a tiny apartment eating instant noodles, trying to stretch dignity across a budget that didn't care about pride. Then a phone call came that sounded like a prank. TechVantage Consulting, a global powerhouse, wanted a partnership. They'd analyzed her work with micro-entrepreneurs and called her methodology revolutionary. She'd built that methodology the hard way. Sleepless nights, obsession, turning pain into process and process into results. That partnership opened doors, then bigger doors. Within months, she was consulting for companies moving millions. Within a year, she was advising multinationals. Within 2, her firm had offices in multiple countries. But the real masterstroke came when she discovered something Richard thought he'd buried. His perfect empire was leveraged, brittle, and hiding lawsuits he'd paid to silence. And Diana didn't just outperform him. She positioned herself where she could own the outcome. "Ms. Williams," a deep voice said behind them. "Apologies for the delay." David Morrison had arrived, tailored suit, Italian leather briefcase, expression composed like a blade. Richard went pale. Morrison shook Diana's hand like this was a board meeting, not an airport lounge. "Diana," Morrison said, "the acquisition of Thornton's final company was finalized yesterday afternoon. The documents are ready for your review on the flight." Brittany's phone slipped from her fingers and clacked onto the carpet. Richard's face went through disbelief, then panic. "Wait, what acquisition? My companies aren't for sale." Morrison turned to him the way a man turns to an unpleasant interruption. "Mr. Thornton, your companies weren't for sale. They were in debt enforcement. My client offered a better price than your creditors." Richard swayed like the ground had shifted under him. "That's not possible," he whispered. "I check the finances every week." I have control. You did, Morrison said coolly, until your questionable investments and the harassment settlements drained liquidity and triggered enforcement. Brittany finally found her voice, and it wasn't cute anymore. Richard, what settlements? What lawsuits? Shurduant, Diana answered, calm as ice water. Apparently he didn't tell you about the employees he harassed, or the loans he took out against the companies to fund the lifestyle you've been posting online. The lounge had fully turned into an audience now, and this time the audience wasn't entertained by Richard. They were repulsed by him. People were recording again, but now they were recording his collapse. Richard stepped toward Diana, desperation creeping into his voice. Diana, we can talk. Work this out. You don't have to destroy everything I built. Diana tilted her head, studying him like someone reading a familiar manual. Funny, when I asked you for basic respect in court, do you remember what you said? Richard swallowed, throat tight. He remembered. You don't deserve respect, he had said back then. You never have. Morrison glanced at his watch. PCs. Williams, we should board. The flight to Singapore departs in 20 minutes. Singapore? Richard's eyes widened because he'd chased a contract there recently and failed. The kind of contract he now realized was probably controlled by Diana's network. She picked up her simple handbag, simple until you knew what to look for, and smiled at Morrison. I'm ready. Richard stumbled after them, voice cracking. You can't just buy my companies. That's not... Morrison opened his briefcase with surgical precision and pulled out documents like a man laying instruments on a table. Tax default enforcement order, $4.2 million. Unpaid labor debt enforcement, $8 million. And this one execution of judgment for harassment against 3 former employees, $15.5 million in damages. Richard snatched the paper's eyes scanning stamps and signatures, face draining with every line. Brittany stared at him, horror replacing her influencer grin. Richard, did you really do those things? He tried to speak and couldn't. Diana opened a tablet and, without raising her voice, read excerpts of emails and threats messages that made the lounge go silent in the ugliest way. Brittany covered her mouth, stepping away from him. Morrison added one final knife twist, calm and professional. Your requested journalist piece is scheduled for publication at 6:00 p.m. Eastern. Title, Richard Thornton, How a CEO Built an Empire Through Harassment and Tax Fraud. Richard shook visibly. Diana, please, I can pay you. We can make a deal. Diana looked at him with something close to pity. A deal? Like the one you offered me when your lawyer said I should accept my place and stop being ambitious? She leaned in just enough for him to feel the weight of it. You always thought you could buy, intimidate, or humiliate anyone who was inconvenient. The only difference is this time you picked the wrong person. Then she turned to Brittany, almost kindly. Check your joint finances. Investigations freeze assets. And if you're tied to him legally, you'll feel it too. Brittany's face twisted with rage. You told me the money was clean. The lounge staff approached, concerned about noise. Diana smiled at the employee like a woman finishing a meeting. No problem, we're done. She faced Richard one last time. You called me incompetent. You said people like me can't build anything lasting. I built a $400 million empire, and my first strategic acquisition was a media company specializing in investigative journalism. That's when it hit Richard. This wasn't luck. This wasn't coincidence. This was orchestration. Not revenge in the childish sense. Consequence in the adult sense. Diana and Morrison walked out, leaving Richard in the lounge surrounded by people who now saw him clearly. Not powerful, not impressive, just cruel, exposed, and collapsing. On the tarmac, the $80 million jet waited like punctuation. And as Diana climbed the steps, she didn't look back, because she wasn't there to win an argument. She was there to move forward. Months later, her face was on Forbes, her company valued at hundreds of millions, her foundation funding scholarships for Black women entrepreneurs. Richard, under investigation, broke and disgraced, learned too late that humiliation is a risky hobby when the person you're mocking is quietly building the system that will bury you. If this story hit you, share it with someone who needs the reminder. Never underestimate the person you tried to make small. They might be on their way to the gate where the jet is already waiting.